Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to e-learning day. I hope you're having a wonderful morning. Today, we're going to be talking about the concept of God's holiness and how that applies to us. And our DLT is that you will contrast acceptable and unacceptable worship, worship that is unholy, and worship that is pleasing to God. So what is holiness? The Hebrew word is kadosh, or kadush. That's a fun word. And it means to cut, in the idea of I'm cutting something in half and I'm separating half on this side and half on the other. So it means separation. Separation from sin. Not partial separation, but complete separation from sin. Holiness is perfection, being apart from, being different from anything that is even remotely sinful. Because holiness is perfection, a holy God cannot stand even a little bit of sin. And that is a big problem for us because it means God cannot stand being in the same area as any sinner. God cannot let sinners into his presence. He cannot bless sin. He can do nothing good for sinners because we are not holy, and he is. We are separated far from God. That is really bad news. Well, let's read from Leviticus chapter 9. Moses and Aaron then went into the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. What? God's glory is coming into the tent of meeting, the tabernacle? Yeah, God's glory is coming into the midst of sinful humanity. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when the people saw it, they shouted for joy and fell face down. What an amazing display of God's glory and God's strength, that he is the one lighting the sacrifice. He is the one sacrificing to himself, as it were. Everyone's so happy. Everyone's bowing down in worship. See, even though we cannot be in God's presence, God loves us anyway. And because he loves us, he found a way, he made a way to bring us unholy people into his holy presence. He has to make us holy. One way he did this is giving the law to Moses. Actually, only a little while before this story, God came as fire and cloud and lightning to Mount Sinai and gave the law for how people can act in a holy way. He gave the plans for the tabernacle and later the temple, the plans for a tent of meeting where people can come into God's presence in a way that won't get them killed. He showed his glory in the tabernacle and the temple to the people. He showed them, this is who I am, and this is who I want you to be as well. He gave rules to the priests about how to sacrifice and worship and how to come to God and bring other people to God. That's the point of priests. They're bringing people to God in a way that will not get them killed. Remember that part. Let's keep reading. Starting at the next chapter. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense. And they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So this is a censer that this man is waving around. It's essentially just a metal bowl that you put incense in and light it on fire, and it provides a beautiful scent. The smoke fills the room and goes up. And God said, when you see that beautiful aroma going up to heaven, imagine your prayers going up to heaven, and God is pleased to smell it and say, wow, that is pleasing worship to me. So they were given very special rules about that censer, about what kinds of perfumes they were allowed to put in it. There was a very specific recipe for the incense. There were specific rules for how to make the censers. God was very particular. If you want to worship me, you have to worship me my way. And then the censers were supposed to be lit by a coal from the fire from the altar, the holy fire. It seems like these men are being careless, and they disobey God, and they bring, as it were, unholy fire. They just worship God their way, contrary to his command. They try to worship God by disobeying him. Does that make any sense? No, it really doesn't. And now, instead of worshiping God in a holy way, they're worshiping God in a sinful way, and God cannot accept sinful worship. So our next point is man rejects God's way. The way that God provided, that is the only way, man rejects. First, by ignoring his law. God gave very specific rules. And you might go, oh, well, what's the point of this fire or that fire? Who cares? God cares. It doesn't matter if you understand the rules or agree with the rules. If God says jump, you say how high. If God says do this, then you do it. And they completely ignored him. And if they're willing to ignore him on this rule, do you think they're going to be willing to ignore him on other rules as well? See, if you pick and choose which rules you think are important enough to obey and which rules you think are not so important, so it's okay if I disobey them, you're leading down a really sinful path that might not look so bad at first, but it will end up in a world of wickedness and sin, and you do not want to go down that path. Obey God in the little things. In fact, Jesus said, if you're faithful in little things, you're also going to be faithful in big things. And if you're unfaithful in little things, you're also going to be unfaithful in big things. So I wonder, what rules or what commands does God give you that you think are not that important, so it's okay if I disobey them? None of them. So ignoring God's law, and then trying to make our own way to God. How many people try to come to God on their own terms? How many churches out there are telling you, well, here's 5 ways to get closer to God, and they have nothing to do with God's way. It's all to do with me. Well, if I do this, then God will love me. Well, if you give me enough money, then God will love you. You know, if you do enough good deeds, then God will love you. Well, you can enter God's presence if you do what I tell you to do. Instead of saying, we can enter God's presence because Jesus died for us and made a way for us to come to him. Your way does not count. Your way is not good enough for God. God already provided a way. And if you don't like God's way, you're out of luck. There is no better way than God's. Here's what God's going to do. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. So the same display of God's glory that seems like the day before, God's glory came as fire to light the altar and burn the sacrifices. Well, now that same fire illustrating God's glory is coming out and burning the priests. The 2 gentlemen who are supposed to be the next high priests after their father Aaron passed away. God will not allow sin into his presence, and his way to get rid of sin is complete destruction with fire. They died, and it was their own fault. Very sad, though. Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored.'" And Aaron remained silent. He has nothing to say about that. Moses, you're right. God said, "I will be proved holy." And any of you attacking my holiness with your sin are going to be destroyed. Guys, that is just as much true today as before. I'm not saying God's going to throw fire at you from heaven if you dishonor him in church. But if you sin, the wages of sin is death. You need to come to God God's way, not your own way. If you sin and try to say that Jesus is a sinner like you, or God doesn't mind your sin, he will be proved holy. He will be honored by the people. He might be honored by your holy sacrifice, like the first day, or he might be honored by your destruction, like the people on the second day. See, God is glorified when good people praise him, when God's children love him. God's also glorified when he destroys sinners. How is God going to be glorified in you? Is God going to be glorified because you worship him? Or is God going to be glorified because you fight him and he wins? This is probably the reason why these 2 men chose to sin. Pardon the bell. Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, so that you can distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and so you can teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord has given them through Moses." So it seems like Nadab and Abihu were up late last night drinking, and they were so drunk they either forgot or just chose not to obey God. And they drunkenly destroyed or tried to destroy God's holiness. God said, "I'm not going to let that happen." So make sure that you are on the lookout. that you are looking for ways to distinguish between clean and unclean. You're distinguishing between goodness and sin, and you're holding on to the goodness and rejecting the sin. God upholds his holiness. God will not ignore our sin. We might ignore God's holiness, but God cannot ignore our sin. And when we try, God does not allow that. He does not allow us to confuse holiness and sin. He does not let us have an excuse, oh, it's not my fault, I was drunk. Yeah, well, who decided to get drunk? He doesn't let us make excuses like, I didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Yes, you do. And if you're confused about something, read the Bible and find out the difference between right and wrong. Guys, are you upholding God's holiness today? Are you defending God's holiness today? I hope you are, by your words, by your actions, by your character, showing who God is, showing that you love goodness and that you hate sin. What is your reaction when someone near you sins? Are you cool with it? Or does it offend you like it offends a holy God? All right, by means of application, I'm going to have you look up some Bible verses and discuss them in a short homework assignment that contrasts acceptable and unacceptable worship. It's only 6 passages. Some of these have multiple verses in them, but it's not a whole lot. Please, please, please read each verse before trying to answer the question. Don't guess. I don't think any of these questions are rocket science. Just read the Bible verse. It should only take you a few minutes. Please don't be lazy. Please. Okay. I want everyone to do this and turn it in. There should be a link in the event that I'm sending you. Okay. There should also be an assignment where you can turn this in. It's called e-learning day holiness docx. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My contact info should be in the event. All right. Have a wonderful time and be holy.